It's Maribeth with sacredgrove.com, where people and pets heal and connect. And today I'm talking with Terri about Pet Sage. For nearly 25 years, she's provided solid, fact-based answers to the questions clients present each day through dogged research. Her passion for advancing feline health was fueled by successfully helping clients employ species-appropriate diets, herbal and nutritional supplements, and nourishing healthy feline lifestyles. And you do work with canines as well, or dogs as well.
Yes.
Terri is certified in traditional Chinese herbology with advanced studies in animal nutrition and complementary therapies for behavioral and chronic health issues. She's a member of the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association, College of Integrative Veterinary Therapies, and the Veterinary Botanical Medical Association. So I feel very lucky to have you on today. Thank you, Terri.
Thank you, Maribeth, for inviting me.
Yeah, we're going to term it, you came up with it, navigating the pet food maze. And boy, I feel like I've been in there and I have not found the cheese yet.
Yes.
I can smell it, but then they keep eating it.
Well, that's the thing. If you smell the dog food, you probably don't want to go to that direction. That's an
You wanted to talk about food that is species appropriate. Can you tell me more about that, Terri?
One of the things that I've discovered over the years in working with my clients is that they really don't understand actually who's living with them or who they're really feeding. You know, the pet food industry does a really good job promoting your animal, humanizing your animal, because people think of their companion animals as small children, and they're not. So we really need to understand that cats and dogs are carnivores, and what that means is they need higher meat proteins, meat organ meats, higher fats, and minimal carbohydrates. Now the dog, a lot of times they're referred to as what we call an opportunistic carnivore because they can actually utilize more carbohydrates than a cat. But a cat really needs 0 carbohydrates. People don't understand that. So when they see these bags of food, oh, for the indoor animal, all they're doing is feeding empty calories. They're adding fiber to a diet so that the cat feels like it or the dogs feel like they're eating, but they are really not getting good satiating foods. So I tell people to really understand with your dog, you're feeding a carnivore. Yes, you can use a few more carbohydrates, higher vegetables, but with cats, really be very careful of what you're feeding this animal. They are an obligate carnivore. They are designed to eat the meats that they evolved with, which are prey. They hunted. They were hunters until we brought them in until the 60s and 70s. And instinct-wise, if you put a cat out right now, they can hunt and feed. Well, feeding themselves is an interesting story because a lot of times the mother has to teach them, but they know instinctually how to get their food.
Right, I see that with, well, this is Bunny back here. And so she's listening closely, but yeah, the little things that we're dangling in front of them, they're loving it because it's as if it's prey, you know.
Yes, they're mimicking prey, and that is very, very important to their mental health as well. So, you know, the play games are very appropriate, but it is truly understanding, you know, sitting out a bowl of dry food that is very high in carbohydrates for the cat is really counterproductive for their health, longevity, weight management, and so forth.
Well, I will divert you for a second.
Sure.
You may not know this, but cats are very picky about what they eat. That's a joke.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I would probably be sitting on a beach somewhere.
Honestly. So, right off the bat, any suggestions? Like, this is a cat who's like she loves all those things that you just said she should not have.
Yes.
What would your strategies be to help if we say, yep, we're going to do what Terri recommends, maybe a couple strategies for us?
Sure. One of the things to really look at is what you want to move the cat to, but also understand cats are imprinted with their foods very early on, and especially the rescue cats. You know, they have been raised, the rescue groups have to use lesser expensive food. Those foods are highly flavored with palatants. those are designed to addict your cat to that food. So
Oh,
they are, it's kind of fighting against you initially. So all of a sudden they become imprinted on that. Yes, I see your,
oh, I mean, I call it kitty crack, and now I
yep.
know. Now you're validating that I wasn't just being smart about
No, no, absolutely not. Particularly dry foods are very hot, but even canned foods use, you hear that natural flavoring, they're using flavorings, whether it's viscera or even some of the dextrose will use to manipulate their palates. They have an actually very impressive palate. Um, so what I explain to people, the goal really is, particularly with cats, and I even like it with dogs, is adding more fresh foods, more canned. And now canned foods a little trickier, but if we can go to fresh foods, and you use those flavoring agents to your advantage. For instance, you would crush up the dry food and sprinkle it like you would use as a topper to the food you want to move them to. So you are using that to your advantage. There are a lot of companies are coming out with toppers now, so use them to your advantage. Um, Understand that particularly with cats, you want fresh foods, you want foods with moisture in them. The dry food, if a cat is only fed dry food, they will be clinically dehydrated just
it.
across the board. So we are looking at causing problem urinary kidney issues right off the bat with just feeding a dry food. And again, they don't need the carbohydrates because they'll convert it to fat. So all of a sudden we have an obese cat. So you will use those food. Absolutely, you can use them as a treat, but keep them as a treat. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That really happened. That's great. We'll try again.
Yes, it, and understand you are, again, they are imprinted early. So it takes, for instance, I use an example, one of the office kitties that lived here, it took me a year to get him off dry food.
Okay.
And the minute he could break into a bag of dog food in the back or cat food, I would literally watch his eyes dilate. It was like really watching an addict.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So I know what I'm up against, and I'm
yes.
okay with that. Thank you. That's really helpful.
And you
Um,
can use that sprinkle tip on top of anything. Can't, if you want to move to just canned food, I'm a huge fan of raw foods. They're coming out with lightly cooked foods now. Use that to sprinkle on top. You know, it's like it's your seasoning that you're using for them.
that sounds
Okay.
great. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, you were going to talk about some cautions with the food trends. Uh,
Yeah, you know, they're getting us in trouble in many ways. One of the biggest ones, of course, we're seeing what's going on now is grain free. And to understand what grain free, as I mentioned earlier, the pet food industry tries to use the marketing trends that is going on with the human market, the human health market. So what's popular in the human health market all of a sudden shows up in the pet food industry. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Understand who you're feeding, species appropriate. So the concept of grain free started out, oddly enough, I read something the other day where they said it started out because of the melamine issue back in 2007. And actually, grain free started out about a decade before that. We saw some of the first grain frees come out around early 2000, I think it was. And we've seen variations of that. Now it's being implicated in some heart condition issues, DCM in particular. Understand that there is research being shown that shows there isn't any connection. So I think we're going to see this go on for a while now. Um, Same thing with fresh fruits, and I think a lot of animals do very well fresh greens, but understand, again, we're coming back to the dog can tolerate more fresh foods, more of the health foods, where your cat, his body's designed to eat the prey that use the fresh greens in them. So, you know, we can do a little bit if it's processed properly, but we want to avoid the highly processed foods.
okay.
One of the most fascinating things that I try to tell people is go back and do a little bit of research on how the pet food industry got us to here. You know, up until the 40s and 50s, well, cats weren't even brought indoors. Dogs were eating. There's some of the early raw food companies were in the 40s.
Oh,
Tin foods, or what they called canned foods, We went to the dry food market because of World War II, where there was a limited version or limited amounts of tin where they were using canned foods. That's how the dry food, the actual cereal companies had it in the background. They were using their plants to make dry food. So it comes about with processing. Remember TV dinners? How that was supposed to
Great.
be the best thing for us? Well, that's just stuck around longer in the pet food industry.
Okay.
So it's really, again, going back to understanding who are we looking at, who's living with us, and recognizing that they are not little humans. They have a very different digestive system than ours. Ours is, well, let's say theirs is 25% of the length of ours. They don't really have the ability to break down a lot of fibers.
Okay, that's really helpful for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, for especially for the line of work that you do, recognizing their bodies are designed, get the food in, get it out. They're scavengers, they're hunters, where we are, we sit down, we prepare, lightly cook a meal, we can process it.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay.
So you talked about it before, but maybe just again, talk to me about the different kinds of food that's available and maybe the dry, the canned,
There's,
fried.
yes, there's a spectrum now, which is terrific because we are seeing so, there are just such a great selection of foods available now. Just understanding where they can put, and it allows you some budget options as well. We know that dry food is highly processed. You know, it's one end of the spectrum. It is the least expensive food, but it also has some of the least interesting or appropriate ingredients. Then we'll look at canned foods. You've got lightly cooked, I'm sorry, we've got canned foods. We've got dehydrated foods where you're going to need to add the water. You've got freeze dried, particularly freeze dried raw. That's extremely popular now because it's more shelf stable. It is easy to travel with. Even the freeze drying process adds a little, helps with the palate, the taste in the food. It actually enhances the food. So a lot of times we'll actually say use some of the freeze dried food to sprinkle because it's so flavorful. Then you also, now we've got a category of lightly cooked, which is really very good, and it's an answer to the concerns of feeding raw foods. And then we have the raw foods. Within raw foods, you've got two versions, what we call HPP, which is high pressure pasteurization, again, reducing the risk of pathogens, and then your true raw foods company. All of those offer budget options, and you don't have to stick to one. That's one of the things that I encourage. In my training, I use a lot of Chinese medicine. I'll use, let's say, freeze dried, or if you have to stick with some dry food, use foods that are, I think, are lower carb. And then for breakfast, like you would use a breakfast cereal, and then use your restorative foods, your lightly cooked foods, your canned foods, your raw foods in the evening. So they are about rebuilding the body.
Okay. So I'm kind of glad to hear about the lightly cooked because I found that to be very easy to feed. And this
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm working on the cats, but the dogs love it. And I do have the raw as well, but I'm doing both
Mm-hmm.
and then some kibble. Um, but the lightly cooked is an okay alternative then for.
It is, and what's nice, it's like you're not going to overcook your food. It's just enough to lightly steam your vegetable. We look at that as the same process. One of the companies uses what they call the sous vide process. It's very well known in culinary work. So it's very minimal processing. The animals love it. It's easier to feed for a lot of people, and they feel more comfortable because they have been so, I'm trying to say, told to be very careful of the pathogen risk in raw food. And one of the things I want to make a point on that is people need to understand in the raw industry for pet foods, the FDA, USDA, there is zero tolerance. What that means is if any food is tested and there is any risk of pathogen, it is pulled from the market. Where our foods, the raw foods, because we expect to cook it, there can be up to 50% risk of pathogens. One of the things that I encourage about either the fresh foods, lightly cooked, canned foods, is we're including water. Because what people don't understand is water is more absorbable for our cats and dogs in their food. Particularly cats, they don't hydrate well by drinking like we do. And so it's important to make sure that there is a lot of moisture in those foods so that they can pull that in within their systems easier than having to drink. A lot of clients tell me, oh, my cat drinks a lot. Well, partly it's because the food is added salt that's making them drink more. The question is whether they are actually utilizing and absorbing that water appropriately is the challenge.
Okay.
So I'd like to, kind of step on this, if you don't mind, to talk about when we're looking at all these foods, to make sure when you're looking at the labels, that's the biggest thing, to really don't be swayed is probably the best way to put it, on what's on the front of the package. It's very, very important that you read the ingredient list on the back.
Thank you for saying that, because that's just marketing.
Yes.
So you get to the ingredients, you find out what's really going on.
I find it amazing. And there are some FDA regulations in foods. For instance, there is 95%, the first ingredient has to be 95% of that exclusion of water. Then there's 25%. One of my favorite label is what they call flavor, or 3%. So that ingredient only has to be up to 3% in that food. And they can still label it. For instance, tuna flavor, everybody thinks there's a lot of tuna in it. There may not be any at all. So when you turn the ingredient, turn it typically on the back side of that front panel, gives you the ingredient list as well as the guaranteed analysis. All the ingredients are in descending order before it was cooked. So make sure that you look at that. And when we look at those ingredients, the first one may be meat, the second one may be organ meat, but if they have 8 carbohydrates behind that, those together, and that's why they split them up. That's what they call grain fractioning or carbohydrate fractioning. When they put those all together, that's going to far outweigh that meat that's the first or second ingredient. Yeah, there's a lot of
Am I looking as concerned and disappointed as I should be?
Yes, I know. There's a challenge on that. And one more tip on that is, especially if you're looking at the guaranteed analysis, make sure if you're looking at a freeze-dried, let's say, versus canned or dry, and it says, on the canned it says 8% protein, on the kibble or the freeze-dried says 30 to 40%, you must convert that canned. You have to, what they call, convert it to dry matter so that you can compare it appropriately to the freeze-dried. The freeze-dried dry has had the water moisture. So typically, I'll use a rule of thumb, is 8%. There is a calculation, and it is on our website, PetSage website, under nutrition, that you can convert that. But a rule of thumb is I'll use 4, multiply it by 4, and that'll get you to where that canned is actually showing you've got around 32%.
Okay. So that's 32%
protein, right? And dry matter. That's a rough calculation, but it kind of helps you when you're standing there in the aisles and you don't have oh, you have to take this percentage and subtract it from 100 and multiply. Just kind of a rough rule of thumb.
Okay. That's helpful. So. Thank you. So how about one thing that I'm always worried about is a byproduct, those words. I've read a lot of scary stuff about like a meat byproduct, but maybe chicken byproduct is okay, but meat byproduct might be some euthanized animal. I mean,
yeah, the byproduct is kind of a crazy used term, and part of that comes from AFCO, which is the American Association Feed Control Office or something like that, officials. There is a huge book that designates this. The rule of thumb, again, is to look at, when they look at byproducts, a lot of times they actually categorize organ meats, things like that the animal would naturally eat. But when they put a meat product, they're actually throwing a bunch of meats byproducts together. So you really can isolate. One of the ways to think, if it's pork byproduct or chicken byproduct, it is an upgraded ingredient. And I don't have as much issue with those as I do um, meat byproduct meals, or even hydrolyzed beef or byproduct meals. I have more of an issue with that. Um, I think in some instances, I'd rather have some of those byproducts, and frankly, I think I probably would in many of these, than a lot of the grains or beans that they're using in these diets.
So which one would you get a little scared about seeing if you saw?
More meat byproducts.
Meat?
Rendered, you want to be very careful of. Um, even be careful of. I'm even looking at some of the things of gluten. I know we use those, but even those we want to be careful of.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
The challenge is we still don't know a lot of information. We keep learning and we keep thinking, researching, and then something else pops up and we're like, where did this come from?
Yeah, exactly. Because we're a lot more interested, I think, than we used to be. So
Yes.
good.
And it's nice. And that's one of the things that I always try to tell people. Look, the companies that are doing the right thing are proud of that fact. They're going to be more traceable. They're going to be open with you and try to help you understand what you're doing. For instance, one of the brands, Open Farm, you can take their lot number and put it in their web. They will tell you where they have purchased where all of their ingredients come from. Where other companies, if they're just trying to give you the runaround, avoid them. If the company won't talk to you, avoid them. You are the consumer. It is your job to be your animal's advocate.
This is good. Thank you. Longevity. How long can we keep food around, or what should we be worried about?
Never long enough, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the best thing we can do is try to offer them the best diet. That is the most important thing, I feel. What is the best diet? Well, it's really doing what we've talked about, looking at species appropriate, but we do know that food is the foundation for longevity as well as the best health. So if you understand who you're feeding, trying to offer the best food that's available, that is not going to break your budget. I understand that. We all do. I'd love to spend millions of dollars on organic meats, and there are some, and a lot of the companies are really trying to offer better foods and understand that they're getting them under budget as well.
That's so nice. Yeah, I was noticing that there's now human grade treats for our animals.
Well, we have to be careful using human grade, and
What
that's the
is it?
challenge. Well, once a food is in a pet food plant, it is considered pet food.
Yeah.
So where those treats are made, if they are human grade, they must come out of a human manufacturing plant. So it's understanding where those foods are made, whether they're a treat, and it is easier. Some of the foods do use human plants to make their products,
Mhm.
but AVCO also restricts a lot of proper labeling. That we like to be able to say we use human grade meats in it, but they're not allowed to.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So yeah, there's a lot hidden behind the veil in the pet industry still. We keep trying to find more information, be more aware of us. Those of us, the reason the foods that I carry, the foods that I've recommended over the years is because I can actually call somebody in that company and say, tell me what the heck's going on. Is there a problem? Is there something that I need to be aware of? Or they're on the phone
Wow.
with me saying, there's something coming up. For instance, I recently had a raw food company that I work with, small batch. They're moving their plant because the plant was forcing them to do something to their foods with high pressure pasteurization. They chose not to. So they said, here's what's going on. We're going to keep you abreast of what they're proud of the fact of what they're doing, and they're trying to be open with their followers.
Wow, that is super.
Yeah,
Nice to
it's a
hear
lot.
that.
I mean, we could go on for hours, Mary.
Oh,
You know,
I mean, wow, that's so refreshing to think.
yes.
So, anything else that we didn't cover that I didn't ask or you would bring up that would help us choosing good stuff for our animals, good food?
I I don't think so. The biggest thing that I can get across is, remember, I know that there's a lot going on in the industry. Again, it's following the human trends, trying to use plant proteins as alternative to meat proteins. Be very careful of that. Um, I think that, the whole concept of meat shortages, if you are taking that involved, then recognize that you are the omnivore. Your body is designed to handle more of the things of plant proteins than your animal is the carnivore. I know that there's arguments on that, but I want to respect who that animal is and how they evolved.
Yeah, I'm there too. I'm a vegetarian, but I joke that my animals are not.
Yes, no, they're not. But I don't, you know what? I'm actually working with a client who's vegan. And she keeps coming up with me. And I said, look, I don't have an issue with you feeding a vegan diet once or twice a week. I really don't have an issue with that. Now, whether a cat would eat that, that's a whole interesting thing, because they actually have what I think fascinating about the cats. They have a level of macronutrients. Their body goes, nope, that's not appropriate for me. But if you want to feed a vegan diet once or twice, that's great. I follow that. But don't expect your animal to follow what you are trying to do yourself personally, because your body is designed to handle it more.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just so everybody knows that you're available for actually giving advice, not just for folks that live in Alexandria, Virginia. You also do counseling or advice
Yeah.
giving around nutrition and food.
Yes, I do. A lot of times I will work on the phone with clients. I'm trying to set up something like you're doing here, or whether I can do it through Skype or something, so that I can actually see the animal or see the individual, so that we can talk about more. A lot of times people just want more information so that they can make a better decision. That's what it
Yeah.
comes. They're very confused. They go on to Dr. Google, and Dr. Google confuses them even more. So what I really want people to know is, yes, a lot of times I'll just spend time to say, remember who you're feeding. Here's what your options you want to look for. And they can walk into a store better prepared.
Okay. Okay. It's terrigrow.com, right?
That's where I'm doing more cat counseling.
Cat counseling.
But petsage.com, there is information how to reach me that way as well.
Okay. All
Yeah.
righty. Thank you. This has been really enlightening for me, and I hope everybody else enjoys this as much as I did. So
Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
Always appreciate sharing information.